Hello, hello. Hi. Okay. Yay! Maria is here. Maria is here. Let me.
Oh, hold on, I need to switch the video.
Amazing.
Hold on, I can't.
Hey, Maria.
Right, so what I want to do, I was trying to connect using my earbuds so that I can, uh, but I don't think I've got the option.
Actually, that might be a good idea. But where are mine? Never mind.
I've got
It's all
headphones,
right.
but they're overhead ones, you know? Incredible.
Yeah, it's
I
all
see
right.
that there's a few people here. Just going to plug mine in. I'll tell you why. I've got a
Mhm.
lively household,
Yeah,
so although I've got signs up, it's better that
I
I can
totally,
just hear you and nothing else.
I totally understand. Um, I'm really excited about what we're talking about today. Uh, and I think that it's going to really be amazing. And what you're going to share. Hi, Tamika.
Hi,
Thank you. Thanks for
America.
joining. Hi. In a little wave. Um,
Right, let me just
so
try to. Sorry about this.
it's
I'm a
okay.
novice at Instagram Live, so please just bear with me.
That's fine.
Okay. No, it doesn't appear that I'm able to pop my headphones in either. Okay, so it's just me and you as we speak normally.
And it'll be
As long as
perfect.
you can hear me, that's all that
I
matters.
can. I
Mhm.
can. I can hear you perfectly.
Good, good,
Um,
good.
So the last 2 weeks have been so exciting here. Well, from Little, we've been talking, as you know, and we discussed this like last month,
Yeah,
Maria. And let me just even give a quick backstory.
yeah.
Um, me and Maria reached out over the phone,
Mhm.
and she said, and I said to her that, oh, I'm doing a series about building wealth. Why? For kids. Because the king, the prince, is becoming a king.
Mhm.
And the coronation talks about inheritance. It
Yeah.
reminds us about wealth building, generational wealth. And Maria was like, amazing. Like, let's do an Instagram live and
Mhm.
discuss this because it kind of merges both, our passions, wealth building and estate
Yeah.
planning, right?
Mhm.
And so we put this in the calendars, and I'm so excited that it's actually happening right now. I really, really am.
Definitely. Definitely.
So,
Definitely.
um,
So thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you. Because I
mhm,
think, yeah, your series is amazing. And I think it's definitely what people need. People need to start thinking about helping children to understand finance from grassroots because schools aren't doing it. It has to start from home. Okay. So what you're doing is amazing. Keep doing what you're doing. And yeah, it's definitely going to grow. I think more and more people now understand the importance of helping children to understand, building wealth, and budgeting because life out there when they become adults is tough and there isn't anywhere to point them in the right direction. Thank you, Tamika. I'm sorry, I'm not even going to pretend that I can speak and type at the same time. So I just want to say thank you.
yeah. Hi, Judy. So yeah, so that's it's you're right. It's
Yeah,
not many children get that opportunity to
yeah.
learn about this. And so where I did the work with regards to teaching children about money in the last 2 weeks,
Mhm.
I think this is a perfect finale,
Yeah,
which is where you are teaching like parents and children as well, because
yeah.
children can be like I'm still a child. I have a mother and a father. So
Mhm.
where now we can empower adults to put together the right estate plan, know
Yeah.
exactly how to, we've been doing all this work, teaching kids how to save, how to build
Yeah.
wealth, and parents doing the same for themselves as well.
Yeah.
But now you don't want it to, you want it to continue going for generations. You don't want it to be wasted. You don't want your child to inherit all this wealth from you and blow it all in like a
100%.
year.
100%. And
Sell off
yeah.
all the assets they've inherited just to go
Yeah.
and, spend on liabilities,
Yeah.
and that happens a lot,
Hmm.
isn't it?
Yeah,
Where
definitely.
someone inherits a huge amount of wealth and then 10 years later they're
Yeah.
broke.
Yeah. I mean, and what I do when I have a client and I consult them or I've done their will for them, obviously I'm then privy to who the beneficiaries are and how much they're going to inherit. And I'm often privy to, young people inheriting a lot of money at the age of 18, 23 or 25, depending on when the parents have decided for them to inherit. And I often say to the client, when I come to deliver your will, I'm going to be a witness for you. So you only have to find one witness. But would you like me to have a conversation with your children? Because they
I,
are going to
I,
now
Maria,
realize how
I'm
much
going
they're,
to
yeah,
pause you there.
no
I'm going
problem.
to pause you there because that is such a great point. And but before you say that, can you just introduce us to
Sure.
exactly what you do?
No
And then
problem.
we'll
No
come back
problem.
to that question.
Okay, so if I'm honest, Elizabeth, I wear many hats, as an entrepreneur, but my passion is helping people to protect themselves and to plan when it comes to their finances. That's my passion. So that's what I do on a day-to-day, and it's about educating and serving people.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not about the sales side of it, it's about the servitude. It's about helping people to understand why protection and planning is important,
Mm-hmm.
and then explaining to them that if they want a helping hand or they want support to put things in place, I'm here.
Yeah.
So that's what I do as a will writer, stroke estate planner, insurance broker, protection consultant, whatever you call it. It's
Yeah.
all finance built into one.
And so,
Um,
may I ask, when you say you're an estate planner, like what does that encompass?
okay, so if I can just backtrack, I think for me, what I like to get across is when I speak to clients or prospective clients, I explain to them that there are quite a few elements to protecting your finances or planning your finances. So it really starts with things like insurance. So making sure you've got the right life insurance, critical illness insurance in place so that in life you're protected. A lot of people think about life insurance, but that's something that's in place for when they're gone. What about when you're alive? So it starts off with that basis. Once they've got that in place, I then say to them, okay, so you now have potentially 100, 150, 200, 500,000 pounds worth of insurance. Do you have a will? Okay, if the answer is no, we need to get that in place because that's all about making sure that the asset that you now have in terms of insurance or property or whatever is it's instructed based on your wishes. Then there's lasting power of attorney, because lasting power of attorney supports the donor, the client, in life, to have their wishes executed just in case something terrible is going to happen before death occurs. Yeah. And once the insurance, the will, the lasting power of attorneys are in place, it's then about thinking about, okay, so how do we ensure that what we've done is tax efficient? You're covered because death is going to happen to us all and we don't know when that's going to happen. So right now you're covered, but how about let's plan to make it efficient? So things like introducing trusts, talking about potentially gifting, if the client's asset class is quite high. And there's things that are a little bit out of my remit as well, such as business relief trusts and things like that. But I can still advise them that maybe that's the route that they need to go down. So it's a three-pronged process for me. It's about getting the protection in place, and then it's instructing it and making sure that it's safe and you've given your wishes, and then it's about making it efficient.
Amazing.
Okay.
So it's protection, instruction, and efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. It's very easy to. And may I ask, Maria, in your experience, why do you think having a will is so important?
Wow. Okay, good question. So the first thing is it gives you choice. Okay, it allows you to choose. Let's say, for instance, we're talking about children, so it allows you to choose, you know, when you die, who is going to look after your children, so you can choose your guardians. Okay, it allows you to ensure that you decide who your wealth that you've spent your lifetime building goes to. Number two. Then you have the option of making it efficient, such as putting it in a trust and things like that. And then it's about, are you leaving ambiguity or are you leaving instruction? You know, a lot of people that I speak to have had situations, and I can recall a situation where a matriarch of a family passed away and the children didn't know whether they wanted to be buried or cremated because they hadn't left a will. So are you leaving your loved ones behind with ambiguity or instruction? Okay, ultimately. You know, and let's not forget that if you know, we have an individual who doesn't have much family, that they get the opportunity to choose who they leave their wealth to, because otherwise, if there isn't anybody that wealth can go to, ultimately it will go to our dear king.
Say that again.
In the law, following the laws of intestacy, if somebody dies without a will, it goes to their nearest and dearest. So, for instance, you know, their next of kin or the next nearest relative. But if they don't have much family, and you know, every effort is taken to find their family members, their nearest or dearest family member, and there isn't anybody alive, then ultimately it will go to the crown.
It will go to the crown.
How many people want that? How many people ultimately want that?
You know, no offense, the crown just inherited $26 billion worth of property, and so I don't think that you want to send your little amount of wealth, or a lot, even, you know, in addition to his wealth already. But that is very interesting. I don't think many people know that that's where their money is going to go to, or their property, or their assets. But Maria, I want to ask, I would like to ask, no, it's okay, because that's a very good point. But what if, like this, the head of the family, the matriarch, if they are unsure, they don't want to cause an issue while they're alive as to, oh, I'm dividing my wealth, and maybe they don't have liquid cash per se, but they have maybe like buildings or property or assets that cannot just be split equally. Like they have 5 children and 2 houses, or, you know, or 1 farm and 3 kids.
Okay, another good question. But everything can be split equally. You know, as long as there's numbers and percentages, everything can be split. But you know, somebody who decides to make a will has the option of leaving specific assets to specific people in their will if they want to. They can leave instruction for, let's say, if it's property or land to be sold or held. There's so much choice, and I suppose that's where I come in as an advisor to help them to understand what can be done from what can't be done, because often when clients approach me, they have the questions, but they don't actually understand, you know, where they stand or what can be done. So, you know, people often ask, should they leave a certain monetary amount? And I often advise people not to leave a monetary amount, because you don't know what your estate is going to be valued at the time of death. Leave percentages, because that way, if you've got £100,000 or £10,000, then it will go an equal split to who your beneficiaries are.
That's a good point. So you don't have to live like, let's say, oh, X amount of dollars goes to this person, X amount of pounds goes to that person. Percentages is the way to go.
You can if you want to, but it's often advised that you don't, because you just don't know where your wealth is going to be at the time of death. You hope your wealth will have compounded, but you absolutely don't know.
Yeah. And I guess another benefit of having a will is you prevent infighting, right? Like between...
Conflicts. Conflict is a big one, especially, I mean, I can only relate to the West Indian community and maybe the African community based on clients, but I often hear about the conflict that death has caused, and we can have a whole series on that. But having a will in place, because it removes the ambiguity, then the conflict is gone, because the wishes and the instructions are absolutely clear. brother and sister don't have to argue about cremation or burial or who gets what, because it's listed in a legal document that's been left for the survivors. So it's really, really clear.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then you also mentioned something that's quite interesting, because usually we think about wills and death, especially around, older people, right?
Yeah.
So you've shared clearly, like, if you don't, if you having a will is great to avoid conflict, to avoid your wealth going to the crown if you don't have family.
Yeah.
But you mentioned something about guardians,
Oh
choosing
yeah,
guardians for young
there's
kids.
a
Can you
big
speak
issue
about that?
there. Yeah, so I normally, so let's say for instance, I've gone to a client's home and we're doing the will signing, and their son or daughter is there, and they're quite young, but they're a parent, let's say, so the client has grandchildren. And I often hear, oh, I'm not ready to make a will yet. I don't have a property yet, or I don't have anything to leave. You have your child. You have your child, and that's the biggest importance to leave instructions for, because again, we don't know when that final time is going to come, when the Lord's going to call us. So, isn't it better to have instructed your guardians? Now, if somebody passes away and they have parental responsibility, sole parental responsibility for a child that is a minor, so under the age of 18, and they haven't left instruction, there is a possibility that social services may need to intervene, take that child into care while they do their assessments on the closest family members. It doesn't happen in all circumstances, but it can happen, and it does happen. Now, what's really unfortunate is that child, while grieving, is going to be taken away from the surroundings that they know, while their family members are being assessed as to whether or not they can care for that child in the event of the parent dying. If the parent had a will, the child goes to the guardian immediately upon death, without question. And that is the biggest thing that I want our people to understand, that when you have a child, a will is so, so important. And you can leave specific wishes and specific assets and, asset classes to your child. You can have a children's trust and leave clear instruction as to what that guardian needs to do with that trust. So for instance, a certain amount at this age can be used for their further education and things like that. I could go on about this topic so long, because again, a lot of the clients who believe that they don't own property yet, but they have children, why should they leave a will? Let's say the child is older, over the age of 18, and they live in council property. Well, when that person passes away, who's on the tenancy? Well, you were, and now you've gone. So where's that child going to live? So it's about having the advice to maybe put that child on your tenancy as they're over 18, so that if you die, that child can be considered to stay on in that property, the place that they've known all their life and grown up in. If the client owned their own home, you can have a right to reside trust, where you're leaving the child or the young person the right to reside in their home, and you can have it for amount of years or a specific amount of time. There's so much that you can do once you're advised, but it's all about instructions. It's all about knowing that the event is going to happen and we don't know when, but thinking about what you would want and how to protect your children, that when you're living you're able to protect, but in your death, there might not be anything there.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I never realized this, and I'm actually being honest, how important, and you really touch on that, how important it is to have a will as a parent. And it's not just about how much cash or property or assets that you have that you don't want to go into probate, but it's also about your child or your children, if you have multiple, and who is going to take care of them. Because God forbid that I passed away and I'm thinking, oh, my sister would take, assuming I was a single parent and there was no other parent, and I'm thinking that my sister would take my kid, so I don't need a will because we live next door to each other. You're saying that social services will take my kid first while they assess.
They may take your, so let's say for instance you're a single parent and the father wasn't on the birth certificate, so you have full parental responsibility. Then if you, on your death, if your child is a minor, that is a high possibility that will happen, because there's nothing been instructed as to who that child's guardian is going to be.
Yeah. And this, you just raised the point, and I'm thinking outside the box here. So
Mm-hmm.
if in this case of domestic abuse victims, where
Mm-hmm.
maybe one parent has been extremely violent, so they have
Mm-hmm.
taken the children and they now reside somewhere else. God forbid, on the death of that responsible parent,
Yeah.
if this the other parent who was abusive was on the birth certificate,
Mm-hmm.
would they automatically get the the rights of the children without a
It's
will?
a good question. I'm not a social worker, but in that situation, what I would assume would happen is on the first parent's death, if social services were aware of potential domestic violence in the relationship, then they would definitely intervene. If they weren't, but they know that the parent was estranged, they would assess the parent, and the child is likely to have gone into care with foster carers while the assessment is taking place, and that is very common.
Okay. Okay. Shall we just take 5-second break because my son wants to ask me a
No
pressing question?
problem. No
Just stay
problem.
right there. Yes, what is it, my darling? This one.
It's a good opportunity while you're talking to your son, Elizabeth, to see if anybody's got any specific questions, if they're on.
Yeah, if you have any questions, please do drop
Yeah.
it in the chat. Yeah,
I'll just,
so
but while we're talking about wills and young people
mhm.
and parents, I made my first will at the age of 23. So, I often tell people my personal story, and I experienced my very first experience of loss when I lost my mother when I was 23. And I was a new mum of a 6-month-old child, and I was thrown into this, situation of learning about, all the things that death brings up, probate, having to have a death certificate, funerals, and inheritance, and paying off mortgage, everything that death, flags in a situation. So within a very short space of time of burying my beloved mother, it was the biggest priority to make my own will, the hugest, because I had a child, and obviously when you experience death, it then alerts you to, our morbidity and the fact that it can happen at any time. I'm now a parent, had a partner, but it starts to allow you to imagine what would happen. And I couldn't rest until I made my will and had my children's guardians laid out. And that's when I've had my first element of peace of mind as a parent. And that's so key. So when I talk to clients, I talk from experience.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm probably on my third will now, because wills change with your circumstances. So we had to update our will when we got married. But it's very important, and and don't wait until you experience death to then be forced to do it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, Maria, you started talking about trusts, and you mentioned something about age, then you mentioned something about property. Can
Yeah.
you tell us a little bit more about why a parent would want a trust for their child, and maybe
Okay.
explain what that is, and then
Sure. Okay. So I have to start off with a statistic, and that is that only 54% of the UK adults have a will. Okay. And of that percentage, at least 46% of that percent have a basic will. A will that wouldn't be fit for purpose and wouldn't meet their objectives, but they feel peace of mind because they have a will in place. Now, when I say fit for purpose, and when I talk about having a will that's tailor-made, it all depends on the client's objective for me. So the first thing I do is ask my client's objectives. And often what the objective is to leave a legacy, leaving generational wealth for their children. And there's lots of trusts that they can consider. So, for instance, there's a children's trust. So if the children are under the age of 18, the assets can be held in trust until, an age that they deem responsible. So the client has an option of them inherit at the age of 18, could be 19, 20, 21, up to the age of 25, that the children's trust could end. There's also, as I mentioned, a right to reside trust, where they could consider, having the child stay in a property for as long as they want, for as long, as they're alive, or until they marry, or decide not to live in it as well. And that's another trust as well. Or the biggest trust that people don't realize that they need, which can avoid them disinheriting their children unintentionally, is a protective property trust. Because a simple basic will, let's say for a couple, is going to be structured where, let's say Anne leaves all of her estate to Bob, and Bob has a will that does the same, so it leaves everything to him, everything to Anne. Bob passes away, and Bob's inheritance goes to Anne. Anne remarries, okay, but both of their intention is for their ultimate beneficiaries to be their children. Anne remarries John, and they're happily married, but unfortunately Anne passes away before John. Everything that Bob had left and Anna's left now goes to John. John has 2 children. The 2 children that Bob and Anne had now goes to John's children. The original children, the original beneficiaries, are disinherited. It's called the sideways disinheritance trap, and it's extremely common. And the way to avoid this is a protective property trust. Okay? And the way that trust is structured is where 50%, so for instance, let's say I'm going to use myself and my husband, Maria and Rodney. So Maria's will states that, 50% belongs to me, 50% belongs to the ultimate beneficiaries, which are my children, and vice versa. So if I'm not going to be cruel to my husband, so let's say I pass away first, then my half goes into trust from the ultimate beneficiaries, who are my 2 sons. Okay? If Rodney were to remarry, my 50% is safe for my ultimate beneficiaries, my children. And that would happen if Rodney were to pass away as well. So my children would, ultimately and inevitably inherit the 100% that they were meant to inherit in the first place. Now, there is a specific way that you have to set up this trust. And the way that the trust is set up is that you have to be tenants in common rather than joint tenants. Okay, so there has to be a severance when you own the property for the vehicle of the protective property trust to work. It's a extremely beneficial trust, but I will, explain that it can limit what people can potentially do with their property in the long run. So it does take some real key thoughts, and if that is the ultimate objective, then that's going to be right for the testator, the person who's writing the will. And it might not be right for everybody, but that is the way to avoid sideways disinheritance trap, which that's when myself and my husband set up our first will as a married couple. We had the very basic will where we left our everything to each other, and when we realized about the sideways disinheritance trap, we very quickly updated our wills to ensure that on death our ultimate beneficiaries would inherit. Another great benefit of having a will-based trust is that it can make your inheritance tax bill extremely efficient. Okay, so while assets are held in trust, okay, for that period of while they're in a trust, they are free from inheritance tax. I'm not sure if people have an understanding of what I've just seen See, Maria, please repeat the 50-50 example with children. Very good question. I normally do that illustrated on a PowerPoint, so it's difficult to do it from memory, but I will do it. Sorry, what was I talking about? Inheritance tax, yeah.
Inheritance trust and inheritance tax. Yeah. And maybe before you repeat that 50-50, you might want to explain what is a trust. Yeah. Like that.
Okay. So what a trust is. So a trust is set up and it removes an asset class. So it could be cash, it could be property, it could be assets, luxury assets from somebody's estate, and it separates it and just keeps it safe. It just keeps it. There needs to be trustees for the trust to work, and the person who would set up the trust is called the donor. Yeah. So that's the simple way to describe how a trust works. Now, will-based trusts can last for 125 years, which is the reason why they're extremely efficient when it comes to inheritance tax. Yeah. So, for instance, just an example, when a client wants to set up a trust, let's say a protected property trust or any form of trust, you know, then I always advise that they are they are a trustee themselves. Okay, so that while they're still alive, let's say they're a couple, while they're still alive, they still have ultimate say on what happens with the asset class that's within the trust. That's very, very important. Okay,
Yeah.
because when an asset class is taken from your estate, in theory, you no longer own it. The trust owns it, which is why it is removed from your inheritance tax liability.
Mm. So
Okay,
now explain to us what inheritance tax is and the
okay.
difference with and without a trust.
So everybody in the UK has an inheritance tax liability, you know, benefit of 325,000. So your assets can be worth 325,000 before you'll pay a penny in inheritance tax. If your assets, let's say for a single person, if your assets are worth more than 325,000, you will pay 40% on every pound above that. Okay.
Yeah. Mm.
If you didn't know that, you know that now, and I'm not sure, I don't know anybody who would be happy with paying our
40%.
wonderful government 40%. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, married couples in particular can benefit from what's called a residential nil rate band, which is 175,000, sorry, on top of the 325, which can take their inheritance tax up to 500,000 each. So as a couple, they can have £1 million. Yeah. They have to be leaving the asset class to a direct descendant, such as a child. It can't be going to like a cousin, you know, or anything like that. It has to be left to a child or a direct relative, and that's how they can benefit from that increased threshold.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you have a trust in place, the assets that are taken away from your estate are placed in the trust, so they're no longer counted towards your estate. So let's say, for instance, in easy terms, you have an estate that's worth 200,000, okay, and you've placed your property into a trust. Yeah. So if you place your 200,000 into a trust, it's no longer counted towards your 325. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Have I been clear there? Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it
Yeah.
makes sense. So
And
you
it will
place
stay.
this 200.
Yeah, and it will stay free of inheritance tax while it is within the trust.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there are going to be fees on the trust that are going to be payable every 10 years. Okay, so it's not you know, totally free of any charges. And what some people need to realise is when it comes to property, there potentially could be capital gains tax as well that it could be liable for. But ultimately, it normally works out a lot more beneficial than the 40%.
Inheritance tax.
Yeah.
And so once let's say your asset of 200,000, maybe a property is inside the trust, you still have that leeway of 350,000. So
yeah, 325. Yeah.
325, sorry. And so as a single person and as a married couple, you have a leeway of, can you remind us again how much?
So if you're in a married couple, so you can benefit from the residential nil rate band where you can pass to each other another 175. Okay, so that can take you to 500,000 each, which as a couple allowed you to have £1 million free of inheritance tax before you pay a penny of the 40%.
I think that is so amazing, especially if you are thinking of getting married and or thinking of getting divorced. Either way, it's a very good good information to know.
Yeah.
Either way,
yeah,
I'm not saying that's
definitely a benefit.
yeah, that is really amazing. But before we move on, that question you were about to answer, Maria, please explain 50-50 example with children.
Sure.
Could we help Tamika with that?
I normally use illustration, so I'm going to use my hand. So imagine a plate, a dinner plate, as a whole, and that would be the estate. So let's imagine it's split in the middle. Yeah, 50% to the husband, 50% to the wife. Yeah, that's what you're doing when you create the protective property trust. So on the first death, the 50% that belong to the wife, let's say the wife passed away, is held into a trust. The other 50% is owned by the husband, let's say. If the husband decides to remarry, his 50% is obviously liable to, they would have already left their ultimate beneficiaries listed in their will within the Protected Property Trust will. So when the husband marries, the wife's 50% is held in trust. It cannot be counted towards any alimony or anything to do with a new marriage or anything like that. But if the husband were to pass away and leave the new wife with the assets that the two previous older couple had, then, sorry, I'm going to start that again. Sorry, I don't think it's clear. I'm confused. I've confused you. Let me start again. So we have couple A who have, you know, let's say they have an estate worth £100,000. Okay. The wife passes away, leaving 50% with the husband because it's split in the middle. The husband then remarries, and then he passes away, and leaves his estate to his new wife who has children. What will happen is it will have disinherited the previous couple's children who they had in their original basic will. So when you have a basic will and you're leaving everything to your partner, when you're not actually considering the ultimate beneficiaries who are your children, and the only thing that can protect that is the Protected Property Trust. Sorry, I'm hoping that's a little bit clearer. It's much more better with pictorial illustration.
Yeah. And Tamika, you can always reach out to Maria if you have more questions. But yeah, it's basically
Tamika who asked the question.
Tamika, yeah. Yes.
Oh, apologies, Tamika. I can definitely do a one-to-one with you and explain that with illustration.
Yeah, but it's very interesting because with a basic will,
yeah,
you have 50%, the other person has 50%, they leave, the wife passes away and leaves the 50% to the husband, he remarries, or vice versa, he remarries,
yeah,
and then the new couple gets 100%. And if they have children and the husband passes away next, the new wife passes on the 100, could pass the 100 on straight to her children. She might decide to split it, but she might just decide to pass it on to her children because she has inherited everything her husband owned, which he could have built with his first wife.
What we find with very basic wills is that for some reason clients are advised, if they're in a couple and they have children, they're advised to leave everything to the husband, and on the husband's death, then everything would go to the children. But there isn't any consideration for the fact that, you know, if the husband or wife passes away, that person will go on with their life and marry somebody new.
Yeah.
And with having that basic will, the ultimate beneficiaries who are the children are not protected. We're not protected because the assets will go into the new marriage, and it will be unaccounted for the children.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Tamika said, I think I got it. Amazing. It's a good one to know. It's really a good one to know.
It's a really, really key one. Yeah. And again, no one imagines that they're good. No one wants to think about them dying, but definitely no one in a marriage wants to think about, you know, potentially them dying and their partner remarrying, regardless of the length of time, and their children that they had together not inheriting anything. But it's a thing. Google it. Sideways disinheritance trap.
Sideways disinheritance trap. That's a good one to know. Thank you so much, Maria. I know that our time is far gone, so I really appreciate you sharing all these tips and education, real life gold with us. I just have a question. How do we speak to our children? And I'm going to ask the reverse as well. How do we speak to our parents, right? So like for, you know, people in maybe my age range or slightly older who have elderly parents, and also for people in my age range who have younger children, how do we speak to family about money, inheritance, wills, trusts? How do we get this conversation going, do you think?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I have a real passion about normalizing conversations and planning. I've met lots of clients who are really good at that, and their children have been really, really involved in the whole process of the estate planning side of things. And I've had clients who've come to me and they're doing it in secret because their children don't want to talk about death, and they don't want to talk about or hear about mummy planning what she's going to do when she dies. So I've had two sides of the spectrum, but we absolutely need to normalize talking about death and what happens at breakfast, dinner, brunches. Even if we only have the conversation once, we need to have it. We need to find out what people want, you know, and what their plans are. I have unfortunately heard too many stories of people passing away and they've left nothing but debt. You know, I know adult children who are struggling to pay off debt that they got into when they used finances to bury their parents because conversations weren't had. You know, and the thing is, I think within the West Indian and potentially African community as well, funerals are a show. Funerals are an expression of maybe wealth and what people had, and there is a lot of pressure on, you know, putting on a big funeral at the end of when someone passes away, whether or not somebody has the finances to do it. So it's a really good question. I mean, I can talk from experience. I didn't want to talk to my mum about death, and I was one of those children who, when mum wanted to talk about death, I didn't want to hear it. I'm now a totally opposite parent, you know. We encourage our children to talk about that. My children are very different, so we've talked to them about what to do to avoid conflict, you know, at the time of when we've both gone, because it is so important. It's just have the conversation, normalize it. If you only ever have it once, you've had it, and put the lid on it if you're not comfortable about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Maria. This has been so informative. I will save this and put it on my profile. So, well, it will automatically save it to my profile. So anyone who wants to watch it, take notes, take many notes, do your research, reach out to Maria. She's going to be tagged below. So reach out to her on her Instagram handle at Thomas Top Cover. To find out more of how you can, you know, set up your wills, your trusts, life insurance, making sure that everything is, you know, financially you are protected, you have all the right, your ducks in a row per se. Maria, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you
so much.
I'll be honest with whoever's on, I'm not great with Instagram, so just DM me if you want to know more, if you have any further questions. I do have a handout that I can send to people if they send me their email addresses. But this topic is something that is so huge that potentially, you know, we might be on again talking further about this. Because I do think
we should definitely do that. We should do that.
But thank you, Elizabeth, for the opportunity to speak. This was my first Instagram Live. So, yeah, it's
what an honor for me. Thank you, Maria. It's such a huge honor that you did that first with me. Thank you. Yeah, and so Pauline says thank you. Tamika says thank you.
Thank you for everyone who joined, for everybody who supported. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, God bless you, Maria. We will do this again.
Likewise, Elizabeth. Okay, take care.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.